Hey guys, what's up? iPenguinPat here, and today we are going to talk about the new Guild Battlegrounds update of 2021 and everything that's encompassed with that. Along with this update, another update actually came out at the same time. It was just in a separate announcement. There has been a lot of discussion about the slow performance for Guild Battlegrounds, and the NO development team has been working hard to figure out what that problem is. And allegedly they have figured out at least what the core is, and they are hoping that in the next several updates that issue is resolved. So that would be terrific. So let's look at the actual Battlegrounds update. And we did a spoiler on this when it hit beta, but we didn't get too deep into it because we didn't know what changes were going to happen between beta and live. Now this is live, so let's get into a little more detail. The first thing that we're seeing is the new map, the Waterfall Archipelago, and what it's going to take to conquer this thing. Now, as you can see, this is a hexagon-based map, and I'm not going to get too much into the map right now. I will get into the map later in the video, along with some strategies. Just check out the timestamps if you want to skip past the other stuff. I will put timestamps for those who are not interested in the other things. So the next thing is that they have improved the province names, basically just to make it easier to coordinate with other players. We can get into those changes in a little bit. Now, the next thing is they have added some new buildings. So as usual, we have checked these buildings out to see what we have going on. The Great Elephant, the Great Elephant is the name of the building, and it is similar to the Statue of Honor in that you get fragments, and then with those fragments you build selection kits, and with those selection kits you do upgrades and eventually can select the Royalty, the Bazaar, or the Citadel. Alright, let's look at the stats. What are we dealing with here? The Great Elephant is a 4x3 building, which is 12 squares, and it has 3 versions after 8 upgrades, or one level 1 and 8 upgrades. And you have the choice between the Bazaar, the Citadel, and the Royalty. The Bazaar gives you 8 attack and 90 goods for your guild. The next one, guild treasury that is. The next one gives you 12 attack, 65 goods for treasury, and 3 forge points. Obviously, as a fighter, to me this is the preferable one. And then the Royalty gives you 6 forge points, 70 goods, and only 10 attack. And the Citadel is actually pretty darn good. I'm really excited about this, both as a fighter for whatever age you're in, and then also as a early age player, because this is not age dependent for the attack. That makes this building especially good if you are one of those early age campers who has no intention of aging up anytime soon. Like I know a lot of players have been hanging out in progressive era with hover tanks, and this is one of the best buildings that you can get because it will help support your guild treasury, and it gives you a much better attack per square than you can get from most buildings at those early ages in the game. So this is a very good building, and I'm excited for everyone that this thing is out. Obviously, the sooner you can get these in your city, the better. I will be putting them, well, were I around more, I would be putting them in my city because they are really, really good. The other new building is the Iridescent Garden. Now, this is another 2x6 chain building that chains to the parent building, to the Great Elephant, just like the Road to Victory. And it also gives defense for attacking army, just like the Road to Victory. But there is one huge difference. This one gives 1 forge point, or adds 1 forge point to that chain. And compared to the goods that the Road to Victory gives, this is actually a much better bonus. For any player, this is a nice bonus, but especially if you are the type of player that has a blue galaxy, this will help your collection for your Great Elephant to be a little bit larger, and is certainly a buff for players that are forge point per square focused. Now, with that said, the defense for attacking army is still very lackluster, and I think that high-end players aren't necessarily going to find this to be as useful as some of the other buildings available, but I don't see a lot of players passing this up, especially while they're getting developed. And a quick reference to the Spreadsheet of Madness, because what video by iPenguinPat and FO Elite is complete without the Spreadsheet of Madness? And here we see that the Elephant Citadel does pretty darn well. It's just short of 1 forge point per square when you consider road, and 1 attack per square when you consider road, and of course you get the guild goods and some forge points and all that. Elephant Citadel is terrific. The Elephant's Royalty I am not as hot on. The extra 3 forge points per day doesn't really do it for me. However, I do like the Elephant's Royalty when paired with the Iridescent Garden. I think that for players that are inclined to have a blue galaxy, having one Elephant's Royalty chained with your Iridescent Garden actually can make for a really nice setup in synergy with blue galaxy, and then put the rest as your Elephant Citadel and only chain your Iridescent Gardens to your Elephant's Royalty. That way you are maximizing the amount of forge points per charge for your blue galaxy if that's your jam. The next item of interest is this new display of Guild Battlegrounds leagues and the guild overview. And I was a little shaky on what this would look like and what this would mean. So it's just some confusion to me about what was going to show. So here it is on one of my secondary worlds, and you can see that you have the, this is the list of times that you have won a particular battleground, and then when you mouse over, you get a Battlegrounds participation. So if somebody wanted to see how competitive you were, they could look at your wins and compare that to participation and come up with a winning percentage. And this is a slight step in the right direction, and that's actually better than what I had originally thought this was going to be. I thought this was just going to be how many times you had participated, and that would have been not super awesome. But the fact that you can at least come up with some sort of winning percentage from this definitely helps to add to the competitive level of Battlegrounds, at least for players that in guilds that like to have lots of wins and whatnot, just kind of that ego stroke. However, this still doesn't help to solve the issue that so many guilds just congregate at 1,000 league points, and there's not really any differentiating factor between that 5 or 6 player guild that just keeps bumping in and out of Diamond League and 1000 MMR versus the powerhouse guild with 70 fighters that's just, or 80 fighters, and it's just, blowing up sectors in less than 30 seconds and it's just completely dominant. This doesn't do a very good job, and the current league point system doesn't do a good job of differentiating those guilds. Now, the other huge change that a lot of players are not going to be super fond of is that the loot distribution has changed. Now, the percent chance of getting forge points and forge point packs compared to the previous Volcano Archipelago, where it used to be about 35, almost 36% chance of getting forge points in Diamond League. Now you're down to only 20% chance of getting forge points in Diamond League. And again, I know a lot of players are going to grumble because they are dependent on Battlegrounds for their forge points, but I think this is actually a good thing for the game. I think that there is way too much forge point farming from Battlegrounds, and that it disproportionately allows players to level up their buildings without being more forge point focused. Basically, you're not having to make a sacrifice between forge points and battle because you can just fight to make your forge points. I think it also makes players a little bit more stingy and greedy, and by dramatically reducing the drop rate on the forge points, I think it reduces the incentive for players to get greedy, at least in my opinion. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that now also with the Iridescent Garden, that's a building that's going to be giving you more forge points. And then also the fact that the Great Elephant is just a much better reward than the Statue of Honor. I feel like this is a really fair trade-off. Now, what we got in return from these forge points is coins and supplies. And again, I know that a lot of players are going to grumble about this and feel like that is really an insufficient and unworthy prize and whatnot. And we don't have all the drop rates for these yet. This is all still being tested. But at the end of the day, I think that this is a much more balanced loot table. And as much as other players may not like that, I actually agree with this change. And I think there's a lot of other high-end players that agree with that as well, because forge point farming in Battlegrounds was really kind of overpowered. All right, so let's get into the map and some of the changes that are made. So at first glance, one of the first things that you notice is that there's no labels or anything on the map. All you can see is the progress on each sector, and that is kind of a weird thing. I I'm not active. I haven't played on this much, but right now that feels like a problem. Like I can't see the progress that's happening with this hand over my flag. And especially when you are moving really fast, if you have a large guild with many fighters fighting at once, this is a recipe for disaster because a lot of players are dependent on watching that flag and seeing the progress on there. And if you can't see that progress while you're fighting, it would make it quite easy to accidentally overshoot. And even with the attack thing, with the target thing, it's still not super easy to see. And that also leads to a couple other things. So one of the new features that was added is what they call the intruder. And basically what that does is it tattles on anyone that hits the sector while there is a stop sign up. And if you come over into the log, you can see it says that I intruded. Now, let's talk about all of the reasons why this could be good and how it falls wildly short. So the first part of this that is very poor is the fact that it only shows the first time that you intrude per day. So that doesn't help, say somebody is walking up a sector, which is a common thing, or bumping up a sector, I don't know, finishing priming a sector. You're taking a sector from, say, 150, where your guild stopped fighting, up to 158, getting ready to do sector swaps, right? And that player is bumping up that sector. They are going to show up on the intruded list, even though that was what they were supposed to do, right? And then say they did that early in the day. Well, later in the day, their intruded has already been marked. So it's not going to help leaders to see when that player is actually intruding on the sector because they were already marked for earlier in the day. So when they intrude later in the day, no one's going to see it. No one's going to know. What would be a more interesting thing to see would be an intruder count, like how many times a player has intruded total on a sector, or on sectors throughout a season, or having an ongoing list of every time there is an intruder on a sector. But a once per day intruder list is probably going to include almost every active fighter in a guild. The other thing to keep in mind is that when guilds are moving really fast and you're jumping 5, 6, 10, 20 fights at a time, depending on how big your guild is, a lot of times guild leaders will put up the stop sign before the sector is full, right? Because you gotta put up the stop sign early to give time for people to respond. And that's going to cause a lot of false positives because if say the stop sign goes up at like 130 or 135 because your guild's just hauling butt, well, 10 people could show up on that intruder list just on, that's just one sector. Imagine that across every sector. This implementation is done very poorly. Now, what I can't do here is fight to 70 attrition and take the sector. However, it has been noted that also in this list, it will say who the person was, who was the last one to hit a sector before it flips. And I think that is actually a really important and big update. And that's a much more useful information than you get from this intruder list because it will help you to catch those rogue fighters, or say there is a spy or a mole or something like that where they are going in and they are flipping sectors before they're supposed to be flipped to cause division among alliances and blah, 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 right? Well, this will help to identify the person who does the last hit, and that is definitely a step in the right direction. Much, much better than the intruder, much more useful information, and so on. Frankly, back to the intruder thing, as it's implemented, they should just get rid of it because it's actually useless, in my opinion. Let's turn our attention back to the map and some of the strategy involved with this. And as you can see here, the FOE Elite Discord, which you should join, has been quite lively in discussing the strategy and what's going on with this map. And I would say overall, the general sentiment about this map at first was that it was going to be really good, and slowly players have come to like this map less and less as they have played on it and tried to coordinate on it. So let's look at the map a little bit and talk about some of the things about it that are good and bad and so on. Now, at first glance, the big thing that sticks out to everyone is that each sector has 6 sectors next to it, right? And that would seem like that would be a beneficial thing. That means that there are 6 sectors that have a chance of providing support for any given sector, so you're going to get more 4 and 5 siege camp fights available to you. And then the other thing is that means each siege camp that you build has more effect, right? It's touching 6 sectors instead of only 4 or 5 on the previous map. But this map also comes with some major downsides too. For example, the guilds that are at the very northmost and very southmost only have 3 sectors they can attack. Every other guild has 4. That's a little bit of an unfair disadvantage for those particular guilds. Now, the next thing is that the distribution of siege camps or building slots also it has been very disputed and really generally not preferred. Like, players just don't seem to be liking this. Now, people have been checking, and there's roughly the same amount of building slots so far on a per map basis as the previous map. Actually, some players are saying that it's trending on the lower end, so it's being a little bit less than average, but it's still not outside of the range of the amount of siege camps. But here you can see a lot of these guilds have at least 1-2 siege camp sector directly in front of their headquarters. But then you have like this guild here, they just got gypped, right? They only have 1 siege camp and then 2 siege camp for days. They have so far to go before they even start getting real support on the map. Whereas every other guild, this guild would be the next guild, to be getting gypped, as far as the fact that, there's no other 2 siege camp sectors for quite some time. I mean, I guess you'd go here and then here. But the bottom line is that the distribution on the siege camps definitely is being a problem and something that players are not super thrilled with, even though on paper and in theory, this should provide more support and be easier to work out well. The reality has been a little bit different. And I actually took a view. This was back from beta. I just did a quick rundown of how many of these sectors were going to be able to get full support. And tier 1, 2, and 3, those are pretty easy. Like, those you pretty much guaranteed to get full support. I mean, it's not 100%, but almost. But these outer sectors, those really start, you really start to run into support issues really fast on the tier 4 and the tier 5. The other thing is that if you're not splitting this map among just 2 guilds, that can also start to cause some really serious support issues, because there are less siege camps per sector. That means that you are much more dependent on owning more of the sectors around your adjacent sectors. With that said, from a swapping standpoint, this map is easier to divvy up. When you're dealing with a map that has 6, groups, right? There's a lot more that you can do. And I'm actually going to pull up this one from Gladius Thrax on our server. Thank you for sharing this. Hope you don't mind that I'm putting this in the video. And here you can see this was a quick example of their swapping. And one thing to keep in mind is that on each tier, you want to basically be alternating every sector as much as possible, right? That is the optimal. So you would want to go one color and then alternate. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 on each tier. All right, that provides the maximum support across all sectors. Now, when you have 2 side by side, that starts to become slightly suboptimal. With that said, this could be a situation where, based on their map and the siege camp support, the 2x2 like this just provided better support, more free fights. But the key with this map, and the thing to remember, is that when you have these 6 sections, that makes it really easy to divvy the map up among more guilds, right? Because instead of only having, we'll call it 8 quadrants to share, right? So before you had 4 quadrants and you needed 2 guilds to swap each quadrant. So that's 8 potential quadrants per guild. Now you have 12. So there's a lot more ways you can split this up. You can split it in half. You can split it into thirds. You can have a guild take half and one guild take 1/6, then another guild take a third. There's just so many more ways to divide this map up, and I think that is beneficial for guilds that are doing the swapping, and for weaker guilds that aren't really able to compete with the stronger guilds, but they want to be able to get a little piece of the pie. A stronger guild might say, hey, we'll give you, we'll just give you this D section, right? We'll give you 1/6 of the map to keep you happy, and then we'll take the rest, or whatever it is. Now, from a competitive standpoint, looking at this map, that also is kind of interesting. Now, the same strategy that works on the other map still applies here. If you just checkerboard and you swap from the inside out, these outer guilds are going to have a much harder time getting in. But one of the advantages of this map for fighting, and one of the things that makes this map, I guess, better for weaker guilds than before, is that they have more ways to, quote, get out, so to speak, right? It's much harder to trap a single guild because instead of only having to get the one sector directly in front of them, now you have to get the two sectors in front of them. Plus you also have these side sectors, and taking one side sector can give you access to even another tier 4 or another tier forward, right? And that also helps you to continue to keep progress on sectors. So guilds that are smart and careful about how they force flips and things like that can use the map shape to their advantage. And I can get into all that later. But the bottom line is that the strategy that worked before is going to work still. You can still swap sectors with checkerboard and all that and make it virtually impossible for guilds on the outside to get in. However, this map makes it easier for those guilds to at least continue to have a few fights on the outer ring without getting totally locked into their base. All right, let's look at the frequently asked questions in the last section of this video. Now, I've already addressed several of these questions in this video, but one that I haven't really gone over is how does this affect the old map? The answer is the volcano and the waterfall archipelagos will alternate between seasons. Each of these maps has its own loot pool and prize pool and whatever. So while you are on the old volcano map, you will still get the same forge point drops and you'll still get the statues of honor and so on. And when you are on the new waterfall archipelago, you will get the less forge points and you'll start getting the coins and the supplies and whatnot, but you'll also get the fragments for the great elephant. So overall, it's a pretty good trade-off, as I mentioned before. Now, keep in mind that that does mean it's going to be a little bit slower going for upgrading your statues of honor and your great elephants. Obviously, it would be nice if you could pick one or the other, but this is what we're working with, so there you go. All right, guys, that's it for the Guild Battlegrounds update of 2021 with the new map and the new loot. Overall, I think that this is going to be a positive change for Battlegrounds. I don't think that it addressed everything necessary, but at least it's a step in the right direction. What do you think? Do you like this change? Do you hate it? What about this do you like or hate? And what should be different? Looking forward to hearing from you. Please like, subscribe, share, join the Discord. You know the deal. And I'll catch you all in the next video.